So do you get back out here?
On occasion, yeah, I would like I've still got family out there, and my partner Allison also has family out there.
Good.
So yeah, we try to come
Yeah,
back
you
when
do.
we can.
All right. So I'm gonna get official here and launch this. We're on air, as it were, on
Love
YouTube
it.
Live, and then it'll be everywhere. This is a podcast and so forth. So this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, and I am Frank Schaeffer, and my guest today is Paul Eastwick, PhD. Paul is a professor of psychology at UC Davis, where he serves as the head of the social personality psychology program and the director of the Attraction and Relationship Research Laboratory. His research and writing has been featured in the New York Times on a file because it's a new book. So I was sent that by the publisher, but I want you to hold your book up so they can see the cover right now and also read the
There we
cover
go.
and the subtitle.
Yeah, so it's called Bonded by Evolution: The New Science of Love and Connection.
Yeah. June will be the month when it will be my offering on my book club. It has to be read.
Oh,
So it'll be
great.
our June book club offering.
Love it.
And just say right away, I love this book. I forget, where did I read the op-ed you did? Was it in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal? You did a wonderful op-ed taken from the book, and then I contacted you.
Let's see. It might have been there was one in the psychology. Let's see. It might have been there was one in the psychologist.
No, I didn't
Which
read
is
it
it
there. I
wasn't
read it
that
in a
one?
newspaper or a magazine, or
It
somebody
could have been the LA Times, maybe. Think that's
wherever.
possible.
Anyway, I read it and then I contacted my producer, Ernie, and I
Yeah.
contacted you. I tracked you down. I like professors because you can track you down like a student does.
We're very available
You're
online.
available. It's like you can always find a professor, and if he has a new book, he answers you, which is good. So
You've got us. You've
I
got us
got you.
nailed.
I know the deal. Um, so anyway, I read it today. I started very early. I get up at 3 in the morning. I literally read word for word. I have
Oh
tons of
my
notes,
gosh.
lots of questions. But before I do any of that, I've asked you to read a passage from the beginning of the book. If you don't mind, let's
Ready.
start.
Let's do it. This is a nonfiction book about research on attraction and close relationships, and it reflects my view of the state of the scientific evidence at this moment in time. I recount many of my own experiences in this book, and I've recounted these experiences honestly and to the best of my memory. When these experiences involved other people, I changed their names and other peripheral details to preserve their anonymity. Throughout this book, I also describe many case studies of couples. To protect their privacy, elements of their backstories have been revised or have been blended with other people's experiences. When I tell people that I work at the University of California, Davis, they naturally ask what I teach. The answer raises eyebrows. For nearly a decade, I've taught an undergraduate course on romance, roughly 600 students per year. Upon learning this fact about me, people sometimes transition to skeptical questions. Am I a dating coach at one of our nation's flagship university systems? I quickly reassure them that my class is nothing of the sort. In fact, the field of attraction and close relationships is the branch of research psychology that I know best, my academic home. The class itself is sprawling, as psychology classes go. I cover behavioral studies on initial attraction, studies on children's attachments to caregivers, studies about love, studies about conflict in couples, studies about sexual arousal, and studies about the physiological effects of a breakup. The class isn't just useful for psychology majors. My students include biology and human development and anthropology and economics majors too. The science of attraction and close relationships spans all these different disciplines. My class is different from other college classes in one particularly striking way. My students have been developing theories about romance long before they walk in. When they attend lectures about meiosis or James Baldwin or historical migration patterns in Eurasia, are their thoughts about these topics already so personal and so elaborated? Probably not. But write out my students' love lives in full, and the pages would dwarf any textbook I might assign. So by the time I meet my students, their romantic experiences are already deeply integrated into their sense of who they are. A few have had serious relationships, many let a good one get away, and they're all still learning. And they all have been rejected at one time or another, in heartbreaking fashion for some. The young woman, for example, who asked me one day after class, "At what point do I need to accept the fact that I'm not attractive?" She didn't ask me this question because she desperately wanted to be the center of attention at a party or because her friends have more followers on Instagram. Her real question, I suspect, was the one that lurks for so many people of every age and generation. Will the process of finding and keeping a partner always feel this daunting, this grueling? Am I relationship material? And if not, is there anything I can do about it? And the most anxiety provoking and insidious misconception of them all, am I struggling because of something evolved or innate about me? Because if so, I'm screwed, right? I tried to answer her as best I could by condensing the entire 10-week course into a tiny, reassuring soundbite. It came out as a splat. It's not easy to dismantle a lifetime of discouraging, biologically determinist messages in the passing period between classes. She smiled politely.
Yeah, I love that. And by the way, for people who are going to read this book as part of our book club in June, you are going to find out that Paul is also a wonderful writer. And so
Oh,
the book
thank
has
you.
charts and graphs and all kinds of academic stuff because he's the real deal. He is an actual PhD. But on top of that, he's a good writer that communicates a subject that we all know something about because we've all either been in love or wanted to be, or
Yeah,
something. So, like your students, I don't come to this half baked. I come with a
yeah.
lifetime of opinion. So let me set this up in terms of our discussion by telling you a little bit about my journey to your subject and why it grabbed me. And then the rest of the time, this is going to be about you. So I'm going to be reading from your book and asking you to explain stuff. So
Great.
as a podcaster, don't feel that you're now in a nightmare where this guy's going to be doing the talking. So I'm going to take a minute
No,
and
I
just tell
love
you
it.
about
I love
myself.
it. Okay.
Um, Jeannie and me have been together for 56 years. We met when we were 17 and 18. We have three grown children, five grandchildren, three of whom live across the street. The first thing I did this morning was get your book, download it, get ready to read it at 3:30 a.m. Then I went and I cooked their school lunches because as their Christmas present, the kids asked me to cook them two school lunches a week because I've been doing childcare for them
Nice.
along with my wife for 17 years. The oldest is 17 and then 15 and then 11. And then I have two grown grandchildren, one who is married to a wonderful French young woman that he met in university in Holland because he grew up in Europe, and the other who just was here this weekend as a kind of a good luck charm to do your book because she has just met someone she's really in love with and they're talking about engagement rings and all sorts of things. So you're talking to a grandfather that does childcare. You're
Yeah.
talking to someone who's been in a lifelong relationship. You're talking to someone who has grandchildren who are now going through the things that I went through when I was young. And that's how I come to your book. And then there's one other note. My last book, which I did something unusual with, I've had some New York Times bestsellers and I've been out there earning a living as a writer, both fiction and nonfiction. But the last book I wrote was called The Gospel of Zip. And the subtitle is A Canine Human Love Story Exploring Why Most Dogs and a Few Humans Live Joyful Lives. And if someone reads that and wanted to know how I drew my conclusions, I'd just put it this way. If you read Paul's book, you will get the scientific version of what I came to intuitively through
Yeah.
a 56-year relationship, but I draw exactly the conclusions you draw. So it's
That's
really
cool.
interesting because in living the life we've had and then trying to put it down on paper in a kind of a memoirish book about my relationship with my wife and my dog and drawing a parallel between what makes good relationships works, whether it's with this a dog, a wife, a child, whomever it would be. Um, my only regret is that I hadn't read your book before I did mine, not because I would have changed much in mine, but you would have been footnoted from one end to the other. I mean, you would
That's
you would
great.
be, as Paul says, as Paul says, as Paul says, which I have
Yeah.
with a couple people. So that's a long introduction, but I wanted to put that
Love it.
out because I want you to know that I love your book. I'm passionate about your book. I finished reading it, and Ernie said, "Should we make this a book club book?" And I said, "Absolutely, and do everything we can to promote it." So, end of preamble. Now we can get into the discussion.
Love it. Thank you. And I'm delighted to hear that. I'm delighted that it's, it may have come out after your book, but I'm glad that it all proved relevant.
Yeah, and it proved relevant to me. I mean, whether it's grandchildren trying to figure these things out, or a granddaughter who's now getting engaged, or another grandson who's married, or my own children who are married with children, or my kids, um, everything you say has been validated through a very unofficial, non-checked research project for life. And a lot of my research is what doesn't work. And in my memoir,
Mm,
I don't talk about, oh, look at me, here's all the great things I did. I write a book basically saying, isn't it amazing that we managed to hang in there long enough for me to grow up,
yeah.
to change my fundamentalist Protestant attitude that I grew up with, that basically women are there to serve men, all the stuff you talk about in the manosphere. I was going through as a child with a very dominant father, someone who was sometimes violent to my mother, but at the same time was a big evangelical hero, a kind of a double vision thing of the public life and the private life.
Yeah.
Worst example possible. And so the way where I started was basically, I put it, I was groomed to be an asshole by divine right, because that was the theology I was raised on. Men were
Yeah.
supposed to be assholes.
Yeah.
You were supposed to be mean. So I read your book as someone who came to a life experience that changed me in the way I would hope your book would inform someone before they go through all that. So all your stuff about the manosphere and everything else really hit home.
Yeah, I'm delighted to hear that. I do think that this idea that men are supposed to be dominant and impressive, but also like stoic and exist on an island.
Yeah,
These ideas are weirdly coming back, not in the old evangelical form, but in more of the like internet influencer form.
yeah,
Those parallels are really odd, but I do agree with you. I think it is a lot of the same messages, and I worry about this for young men a lot, that they just have a backwards idea
yeah.
of what men can be, and frankly, like what we evolved to be.
Yeah, and your whole book is very important. But of everything I've read, I think you give the best analysis and answer to what you call and other people call the mansphere or the manosphere.
Yeah.
So that whole section of your book is kind of a standalone, informed piece that I've done a lot of thinking about, because I come from a background that wasn't quite that, but was very much theologically in that direction. And of course, now with Trump and Hesketh and all these, chest beating
Yeah.
people. And then in addition to which, I had a Marine that fought in Afghanistan. My youngest son fought in Afghanistan twice and once in Iraq as a Marine at the beginning of those wars, and then came home safe and so on. Never got into that manosphere stuff, but you know, I've been involved with my culture enough, and then through him in the Marine Corps, to understand some of those vibes. And I
Yeah.
say again, I think you've written wonderfully. So okay, enough of all this. Let me get into the book.
All right, ready.
You write. Okay. One warning: I do something. Sometimes I piece bits of the book together, where I'm going through the book and putting together a paragraph that isn't consecutive. That I take a piece and I stick another piece that I think goes with it to do the thought. So if you suddenly say that's not how that paragraph is, it's because I'm cutting and pasting,
Love
so I
it.
can get the questions I want, also proving I really read your book. I
That's
wrote this
great. I
book.
love it. You're
Yeah,
making me think, making me work. I like it.
yeah. I wrote this book because I saw a creeping pernicious pessimism supercharged by a handful of angry men online. Humans have been forming and maintaining romantic relationships, often happily, for hundreds of thousands of years. And if you're willing to dig in, the science of how and why we do it is inspiring. This book will illustrate how attraction is best depicted as a process of finding and oftentimes creating a compatible relationship within a small set of romantic options. Although the mating market is an inadequate metaphor for understanding human romantic relationships, we won't jettison it entirely. Online dating is here to stay, and we need to understand what people are doing when they feel like mate shopping. In the science of close relationships, support is central to what makes a bond strong and what bonds do to help us survive and thrive. Support comes in two forms. In one form, two people help each other recover from adversity, called safe haven support. In the other form, two people help each other rise to meet new challenges, secure base. And to bring these twin forms of support to life, couples need to learn how to be a rock for each other when times are tough. Another section: I worry about whether the science that I love will continue to be mangled and we have a lot that we're going to talk about in terms of the science you think has been mangled by people who don't get it, people who don't recognize that humans are bonding creatures, and people who think there is something natural about sticking men and women into tiny, distinct boxes. And of course, we're going to be talking about that. Skipping ahead, the manosphere of personalities champion a version of masculinity in relationships that conveniently fits old-fashioned narratives. It is right and good for men to be traditional, tough, macho, steroidal. To men, women to men, women are for sex or mothering, not both, and certainly not for friendship. They explain men's lagging performance at school and work by lamenting how men have become too effete to control and dominate the way they used to. And then another section, we can elevate the value and importance of long-term relationships without celebrating an old-timey conceptualization of marriage. Nothing about the centrality of relationships to humans' health and well-being reinforces the idea that a husband has dominion over his wife, or even that a relationship is about a piece of paper from City Hall. So anyway, I put together a little bit to give a flavor of what you're dealing with. There's a lot of subjects there, so unpack them however you want and tell us why you wrote up that and how your research academically has informed what you're writing. I think that's such an interesting question.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So I think what we see in a lot of those passages is a
Mm,
distinction between two metaphors or two ideas about what relationships are. The one that I'm pushing off of, the metaphor, the relationships type that I think is a bit overdone in our culture right now, is this idea of the mating market, and accompanying it is the idea that men need to be especially tough, dominant, the solo stoic provider, and that's what's especially appealing. So it's a very hierarchical way of thinking about desirability, thinking about relationships, that prioritizes, I think, a lot of, what I would call like mid 20th century ideas about what masculinity is supposed to look like. There's a lot to be said for attributes like resilience, but I think sometimes it goes too far and
mm,
it pushes men into a place where they aren't going to be so in touch with their own emotions, and they might even be hesitant to reach out for support when they need it. I
mm.
think this puts men in a tough spot. And if men think that this is what it takes to be attractive, either initially when you're trying to, attract somebody in the first place, or in the context of their ongoing close relationships, I think they're going to be in trouble. And I
Yeah,
think they fundamentally misunderstand the nature of ongoing relationships and initial attraction too, that a lot of these qualities aren't as appealing as we assume.
yeah,
The other form, that the one that I'm championing, is this more relational form. It's about support, it's about attachment. I think people might be surprised to learn that these features start emerging in the initial attraction process very quickly.
yeah,
Sometimes I'm fond of pointing out that you mentioned safe haven and secure base in there. This idea that, okay, who do I want to go to when I feel down about something, or who do I want to go to celebrate?
yeah.
Well, that's one of the things people clue into on date one. They're
Mhm.
trying to figure out how much they want a second date. People are thinking about that. And that's true for men and that's true for women too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, physical attractiveness, people are drawn to it. People love somebody who's funny and who's confident. All that's true. But we also really want somebody who feels like an attachment figure even early on. It's a squishy idea, but it's everywhere in the science.
Yeah, one of the good things you did is you sort of opposed some of the things of evolutionary psychology and these other things. And I want to get into that. And also the idea that, for instance, men sexually want something very different than women want out of a relationship. And you kind of go back and look at some of the things we've accepted without much discussion. Oh, yeah, that's how it is. And it's
Yeah.
become part of the general parlance in the manosphere, but other places too. The feminist community, academic, there's certain things that, oh yeah, this is just the air we breathe. Men want this, women want that. But I loved how you questioned those accepted ideas. So let's just go to one that I need you to explain a little bit for people who haven't read the book yet. And that is, I won't call it your opposition, but to your questioning of and parsing through certain accepted things that came out of the 1980s, 90s, and into the early 21st century when it came to evolutionary psychology and assumptions about relationships you disagree with. And I want you to tell us what those are and why, and then
Yeah.
what you see as the truth of the matter now through the lens that you have, as opposed to what had been accepted. Just give us some examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start with gender differences because I mean, this is kind of where I started, where my
Sure.
research really got going. We were looking at the kinds of attributes that men and women want in a partner. And
Mm,
what people had been doing for 50 plus years was you ask people, rate these traits on scales. Okay. So I give you a trait like attractiveness, and I give you a rating scale. How much do you like attractiveness in a partner?
mm,
And men will give higher ratings than women do to traits like attractiveness. And you see the flip, potential or ambition. Women will say they like those traits more than men.
mm.
So people looked at that and they said, well, men and women have different preferences. But when we got started, we were wondering, well, what happens when people actually meet other people face to face? And you're not thinking about these traits in the abstract. It's not a rating scale on a piece of paper. It's a
Right.
trait that you're experiencing by interacting with somebody else who may have the trait or not. So we looked at our speed dating events. We ran these speed dating events for, mixed gender speed dating events for undergraduates. And we would look at, okay, here are these women, they're going speed dating. Some of these guys are ambitious, some of them are less ambitious. How much do they like the ambitious guys? Well, they like them a little bit. Maybe they like them 10% more than the
Mm,
unambitious guys. But when we flip it around and we look at what the men liked, well, the
mm.
men tended to like the ambitious women a little more.
Yeah.
And it was about 10% more. So it was the same magnitude
Mm,
of the experience of ambition. Ambition drove their liking judgments to the same extent, regardless of whether they were men or women. So that really led us to this idea that we see gender differences, sometimes big gender differences,
yeah.
in what men and women say they're looking for. But when you look at what they actually like when they're
Yeah.
meeting people face to face, the differences are not nearly so stark.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about differentials of as little as 10% when you
Yeah.
actually measure them. And I love that because I thought, oh, yeah, now I'm finally reading something here about these accepted ideas. So dive in a little bit to some of your differences with evolutionary psychology and how that set us up for false ideas about not just gender, but sex and relationships and bonding and support.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit of that, and then we'll get back into the specifics of the book.
Yeah, so I think another idea that comes out of evolutionary psychology is the concept of mate value. It's this
Yeah.
idea that there are desirable people and undesirable people, and
Mhm.
that mating relationships are really about is getting the best possible deal in the form of the traits of the partner you can land. And
Mm.
so if you're a six, then you hope to land somebody else who's a six, and if you can trade up somehow to a seven or an eight, you should do that. It's a very market-oriented way of thinking about relationships. It's a little mercenary. It can also be kind of depressing too, because
Sure.
if you get left by somebody, it means that you were lesser than the person that they traded up for. Um, this perspective overrates the extent to which people agree about who's a desirable partner and who is not.
Mm.
And it really overemphasizes first impressions. First impressions, it's true, you see agreement about who's desirable and who's not. But a lot of our research was showing that, okay, but a lot of times we get to know people before we form relationships. And the more
Yeah.
people are getting to know each other over time, they actually start agreeing less and less about who's desirable and who's not. And
Yeah.
I think, and people find this counterintuitive, and I get it, but I need you to remember, like, when was the last time you were in a class or a workplace with somebody for like 6 months? And okay, everybody agreed this person was a six at first, but I bet what happened over time is
Mm.
that opinions diverged.
Yeah.
Some people started to see that person as a nine, and other people maybe saw them as a three. But with that increased idiosyncrasy, you
Yeah,
get more opportunities for people to find partners who like, oh, I think this person's a 10. I don't know why you don't see it, but I
sure.
do. And
Yeah.
then, you find relationships where two people think very highly, uniquely highly of each other.
Yeah, well, before we go further, I just wanted to get into your methods a little because, of course, I've read the book, so I know you did all these studies and you
Yeah.
interviewed hundreds of people and you do. So just take 30 seconds and then we don't want to diverge into methodology too much, but give me
Yep.
30 seconds because I feel you back up your conclusions with real studies. These aren't mere impressions. You have tested ideas.
Yeah.
Talk about how you did that and the time frame for doing this.
Yeah, so here's one example of the studies that we did in this vein. We
Yeah,
had all of these small groups of university students, and a couple weeks after they had first met, and they're still kind of just getting to know each other.
yeah.
We had them all evaluate each other, basically like a bunch of judgments, like how dateable is this person?
Hmm.
And so you see some agreement there about who's dateable and who's not. Who would you be interested in maybe getting to know a little better versus not? And then we do the same thing again at the end of the academic semester. So that's like 10, 12 weeks later. So a
Yeah,
few months have passed. And what happens at this point is that that agreement has gone down and the idiosyncrasy has gone up.
yeah,
So originally, at the beginning of the semester, this person's a six, but there's some disagreement there. Some people say five, some people say six, some people say seven.
yeah.
You fast forward to the end of the semester, and now it's like three, four, five, six, seven, eight,
Sure.
nine, a much wider spread.
Well, they're starting to
And
look at the whole person.
exactly. It's the whole person. And well, now with all this time, I've had experiences with you. I've got a history with you that like other people don't share. Maybe that history was bad. maybe you made an aside to me that I did not particularly appreciate. But
Yeah.
maybe you told a story that I thought was particularly funny. And so these idiosyncratic experiences, as I get to know people better, leads to that spread over time.
Yeah, so you're basically looking at somebody and saying, okay, at the beginning of the thing, they're 5'8" and not 6'2", and so they're not on the
Yeah,
scale. But
right.
since they told me a really funny story and made me laugh, and actually I love having lunch with them, all of a sudden it's like, well, no, to me, they're closing in on a 10.
That's exactly right. And guess what? When we were evolving on the savannah
Yeah,
100,000 years ago, that's much closer to what life was like. You didn't know that many people. You didn't get to meet many strangers, but
yeah.
you did interact with people repeatedly over time.
I
So
have
that's
a
why I've always liked studying groups like this.
Yeah, I have a note that I wanted to ask you, and I didn't have time to go through all your footnotes. So forgive me if
Yeah,
this is in the
that's
bibliography
okay.
or the
It's a
footnotes.
lot.
I'm sorry, but I did read everything in the book. But one book that had a huge influence on me, besides yours, which I mean truthfully, has really solidified some things for me. I'm
Oh, it's great.
eternally grateful that you wrote it. Was a book by someone called Elizabeth Marshall Thomas, and it's called The Old Way. And she wrote it from her notes she took in the 1950s. So this is pre-modern feminism. She's not trying to make any kind of a point about being with her dad and her mom. Her dad was a co-founder of Raytheon, and he took 2 years off and he went and lived in the Kalahari Desert with his 19-year-old daughter and her brother and his wife, and made contact with the San people, who in the Kalahari were the
Yeah.
oldest hunter-gatherer group that could provably, not through them tracing it, but academics trace them having been there, and I'm not making this number up, for 80 to 100,000 years.
Yeah, I think
And
that's right.
her family was the first contact they'd had with any outsiders. And
Yeah.
soon after that, in the 1970s, the South Africans arrived in Namibia and they ruined everything.
Yeah.
Okay. But they got in with very respectfully and with them and made great observations. Anyway, long story short, when I talk in my book and when I talk to people about the fact that I'm a caregiver or that my wife is very much an equal in our household and so forth, one point I make is, look, I didn't come up with this. This has nothing to do with feminist demands. This is how she found them in the Kalahari, because the women were
Yeah.
doing the gathering, the men were hunting, the old women distributed the meat, the men
Yeah.
took care of the kids as much as the women did, and it wasn't because of any ideology at all. It was
Yeah.
because this is how you survived.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so when
And
I read that in your
yeah.
book, I just thought, oh, good. I'm not making this shit up. He's saying the
Yeah.
same thing. I loved it.
Y- Yeah, and you know what's consistent with this idea? Anthropologists, they do the best they can to study these old ways. And it is harder and harder because of, the encroachment of
Sure.
industrialized societies, et cetera. But one thing I find fascinating is like we think there's this distinction, and we kind of get this from looking across species between, oh, there are like species where like they have a lot of kids and say good luck, or there
Yeah.
are species where they have very few kids and they invest very heavily. But I love these studies by the anthropologists. This is studies by a guy named Jeff Winking, and what he shows is that it's actually both of these things. So
Hmm.
what you see is that when fathers are around, and they are contributing and they are provisioning and they are helping with offspring,
Yeah.
what that does is it speeds up the wife's reproductive cycle. And by that, I mean like she'll start ovulating again more quickly after the most recent kid. It can take a while in those kinds of cultures before the
Yeah.
ovulatory cycle kicks in again.
Yeah.
Um, and so father provisioning speeds that up, which leads to more reproductive success in the classical
Sure.
sense of the term. So it's like heavy investment in offspring leads to more offspring. So it
Yeah.
totally destroys that old idea between like, oh, many kids versus few kids. It's
Yeah.
like, no, the provisioning is the thing that
Yeah.
led to our greater reproductive success.
Yeah. Or this is what real men do. And in the past, they did this
Yeah.
until all this modern feminist stuff is just total bullshit because
Yeah.
reading her book, she wasn't making that point. That's not what the book was about. But it made an incredible point because at every turn, how they treated children, how they treated the elderly, it was basically a society that you would say, hey, this is great. Maybe they're all evangelical Christians because they're following Jesus's teaching. Oh, wait a minute. Um,
Seriously.
they're 100,000 years old. Nobody had ever
Yeah.
heard of Judaism, let alone Jesus at this point, and this is how they've survived. So it made me think that maybe evolution actually has some lessons to teach us, which was kind of a preparation for your book.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that is kind of one of the lessons of my book is like actually like evolution, if we really dig deep into the nature of human evolution, it's weirdly
Yeah,
more feminist than we think.
it
And,
is.
yeah, I mean, I point to things like, we think about, oh, there's this idea, right? Men evolved to be like tough and dominant,
Yeah,
etc. But when you look at the last few million years of human evolution, that's not the way it's gone for
that's not
us.
how it did.
We used to be much bigger
Yeah,
than the females. We used to have the sharp canines because we were fighting all the time. You didn't
yeah.
want to let us around kids. We're dangerous around kids,
Mm.
not human males, because the women selected the gentler, smaller, kinder men
Yeah,
because they were looking for bonded partners and
yeah.
people that could be decent provisioners and caregivers, and so this is what they got. So I don't get this whole like, nah, we got to go back to the old ways where we were tough and dominant. Like you're talking about a tiny blip in, in the mid 20th century. That is
Yeah.
not the arc of human evolution.
Well, and a blip that comes out of agriculture and cities and all sorts of
Yeah,
hierarchical structures, which are very new. I mean, we
yeah,
talk about the Roman Catholic Church is so old, it's 2,000 years old. It's not a half an eye blink. I mean, that's in terms
yeah,
of human existence, everything that religion teaches, anything that modern philosophy teaches, anything that you've read in Kurt Vonnegut, that's like 1 second
yeah,
ago.
yeah,
Anyway,
seriously.
let me get back to your book.
Yeah,
I forgot we were doing a podcast. I'm just enjoying talking to you. Um, so you write and you say this book is for anyone who felt that this popular scientific story of human mating is bleak, that if you look at it too directly or internalize it too deeply, you could become overwhelmed with cynicism and quit the whole gross spectacle. In fact, the evolutionary psychology narrative is warped and distorted. There is a more optimistic, more interesting, and more accurate relational evolutionary story that connects the scientific facts. The real story is about how people evolve to form emotionally meaningful attachment bonds with each other and how satisfying relationships stem from close interpersonal attunement and compatibility. And of course, that could be on the cover of your book. Like, why do you read this book? Because this is what the book, I think, I'll go so far as to say proves. I think you've made a really a slam dunk on it. So talk about that central point of your book for a while.
yeah. Yeah. So part of that process, as women a few million years ago were selecting these gentler, smaller men. Part of the idea there was that the attachment bond was becoming a key part of human mating. There are other animals that pair bond in the
Sure.
way that we see in humans too, but we're kind of unique, certainly among the great apes, and it's also not that common in primates. But the concept of an attachment bond is that these are two people who go to each other basically to feel home. This happens at a physiological level, but
Mm,
when two partners are bonded with each other, it's like the body expects the other person to be around, and you're calmer, you're not stressed when the other
right.
person is there. There's also tangible components too, like it's somebody that I know I can go to for support, and just the knowledge that this person is there is often sufficient to
Hmm.
calm me down, to keep the stress at bay. And critically, it's important to feel like there's somebody you can go to celebrate the wins, to
Yeah,
celebrate
absolutely.
successes. In some ways, debate that's even more important
Yeah.
than the part about who you go to when you feel down. So all of these components are what we see very prominently in the most satisfying relationships that people have. And building this sense of attachment is a really core part of what a relationship is. So I think that captures this central idea that romantic relationships are best characterized as attached relationships, and there's a real evolutionary rationale for why we tend to do this.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense too. Also, just in tested experience of what actually works. I mean, the reason Jeannie and I have been married so long, there are a lot of reasons when we actually fell in love and all sorts of stuff, but it's because I had to unlearn a false narrative.
Yeah,
And I can tell young men, um, as a father and grandfather, look back over a lifetime and just say, hey, you can do this stupid stuff if you want, but if you actually want someone to love you back and be there for you as a companion and have that safety in knowing that she has your back, this other path doesn't work terribly
yeah.
well. And
Right.
and
No, it really doesn't. I mean,
no,
we see this too in ongoing relationships. Often the most central thing
yeah,
is that ability to open up and be vulnerable to another person,
absolutely.
to let the walls down a little bit,
Yeah,
because just the process of like asking for support, you're actually doing a wonderful thing for the other person, because if
yeah,
they can support you back and you're
yeah.
appreciative for that, that's just this wonderful back and forth dynamic. A lot of times in close relationships,
Mm,
people just want to feel appreciated. They just want to
absolutely.
feel like they were helpful to this other person. That's a good sign
Yeah.
in an attached relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me dive back into the book here a second. I have some more things. Um, You write, and I put a note here at the beginning, why marriage? Our evolutionary instincts don't prime us to chase the most attractive or highest status partner we can find, nor do they push us to worry about the difference between our partner's mate value and our own. Rather, we crave attachment bonds with partners who can meet our need in good times and bad. In the strongest bonds, we treat our partners as a safe haven by going to them for practical emotional support. We seek assurances in the face of adversity and insecurity. And we don't, quote, keep score of who's contributing what or who's making bigger sacrifices when navigating career transitions, conflict, or the logistics of taking the dog to the vet. And when we encounter opportunities, we treat our partners as a secure base. I love that. By using them as a springboard. I love that. To learn,
Yeah.
discover, and create, celebrating each other's successes, accumulating shorthand inside jokes, and traditions forming a shared solidarity. Inside jokes, by the way, including favorite lines from favorite movies, which
Yeah.
we both Jeannie and I get. And it's so funny with the
Yeah.
generational thing. It's like we'll say something in front of a grandchild, expecting them to light up, and they haven't even seen the movie. And of course, it was
Yeah,
part of
right.
so as you get older, whatever. So let me just pause to reintroduce you here a second, and then we'll keep going forward. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, and my guest today is Paul Eastwick, PhD. And Paul teaches and does all sorts of amazing things. He's the host of a popular podcast, Love Factually, with his longtime colleague, Ellie Finkel, where they analyze rom-coms and romantic dramas. from the perspective of relational science. He is the author of a book that will be our offering on It Has to Be Read, our book club, Bonded by Evolution, the New Science of Love and Connection, which is available now and will be our June offering. And I would ask you to also support what I'm doing by subscribing right now on YouTube to what you're watching, and to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and to my Substack, It Has to Be Said, at frankschaeffer.substack.com, where I make my commentaries. And you can follow my new project at thegospelofzip.com, and it is online, all 8 hours of it that I read out loud with a professional crew filming it. It is free, so I am giving you the book. You can also support our work by making a tax-deductible donation to georgebailey.org. Please do that if you like these podcasts, because my producer Ernie and all the other people we work with need to be paid and have some expenses. So, okay, let's get back to your book here a second. Will you hold it up and give us the subtitle again? Because I wrote it in a file and I want people to see the cover. When was it actually
Absolutely.
published?
It was published February 10th, so about 3 weeks ago. But it's
Great.
called Bonded by Evolution: The New Science of Love and Connection.
Yeah, and I'd be waving my copy around, except mine's in the middle of in my computer. So let me get back to something I want to read from the book and talk about. This support business that you speak of. When
Yeah.
we receive safe haven and secure base support from our partners, we are more likely to thrive. We believe that our lives have purpose and meaning. We feel a sense of connection to others. We give our time and energy generously, and we become optimistic and resilient. So I know we've already been talking about this, but it's a huge point and it's so well made. Just go into the science of that.
Oh, wait, Frank, you muted yourself. There we
I
go.
Okay, so basically,
The
I
science
muted
of
when I
that.
should
Yeah.
have unmuted. Um, yeah, and Ernie just noted mute, so everybody's telling me I muted myself.
But go into the science of the support giving processes again. So, yeah, we see this in initial attraction settings, and we see this in ongoing relationships too. That one of the strongest predictors of somebody's health and well-being is whether they feel like they've got close others who are looking out for them. We sometimes call this the need to belong,
Yeah,
and it's one of the most fundamental human motivations, and we think that it exists in humans because we evolved to live in small groups. I mean, you couldn't go it alone
right.
on the savannah. You were likely to perish if you tried. We needed to have other people around, sort of forming a protective layer and looking out for us and also helping us to find the
Yeah,
sustenance that we needed to survive. So we are group living creatures. The need to belong reflects that. And essentially, it prompts us to seek out other people, at least when things are operating well. It prompts us to seek out other people to restore that sense of
yeah,
belonging.
yeah. In
Close
your book,
relationships are a central way that people do that.
yeah, in your book, you kind of have the little bulleted points here. You say on the safe haven side, that cultivation looks something like this: create a sense of security for your partner. There is commonly an early period of uncertainty as relationship
Yeah.
is getting off the ground. Feelings can be murky and unstable and hard to pin down. But once you know this is someone you want to be with, say it, even if it
Yeah.
makes you feel vulnerable. Then another one, you say, practice being a good listener. Honest, meaningful personal disclosures are rare. When your partner offers you one, it means that they trust you. Another point you say is encouraging your partner will often require that you accept your partner for who they are and who they want to be. And I love that you put those two things together. I think that's brilliant. Sometimes your partner may have goals and aspirations that seem strange to you or that you would not pick for yourself. Proper encouragement requires an ability to distinguish between what you might imagine wanting in their shoes and what your partner actually wants for themselves. And I really love that advice you give people, because I know you say, you're not a relationship counselor, but that is close to the
Yeah.
best sort of advice you could give someone.
Yeah, it's like on the one hand, it sounds deceptively simple to
Mhm.
say like, well, you just gotta like support the other person and like be there for them, et cetera, et cetera. But the nuts and bolts of how we do it, it is quite tricky because this other person is not you. This other
Yeah.
person has different goals and different preferences, and initially as relationships are getting off the ground, sometimes those different goals and preferences are quite exciting. It leads to a sense that you're expanding and learning new things. But as relationships go along, that can be a source of tension
Mm.
if we're not really listening and paying attention to the fact that like for my partner and I, it's about the way we go about planning our weekends in particular. I
Yeah,
am very like, okay, let's plan out the whole thing. Let's structure the whole thing. Obviously, it's going to be best if we if we plan, basically every half hour. And she's
yeah,
like, no, no, no. I want to just like relax and like calm down from the
yeah.
week. And it takes a lot of listening and a lot of like checking in, like, okay, we tried something a little new. Like I tried to calm down with the planning. Like, did that work for you? Here's what I
Mm.
noticed. Like, these are the kinds of things that therapists do for people.
Yeah.
But it's really like it's practice listening and also practice articulating what your needs are in a
Mm.
way that doesn't attack the other
Yeah,
person.
and
And
doesn't
it's hard to
contradict.
do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's very
yeah,
hard to do
exactly.
because basically you're saying, well, not enough sentences start with "it seems to me." It's like, hey,
Yeah.
anyway, you talk about compatibility is the essential ingredient in human mating relationships, regardless of whether we're talking about sexual attraction, relationship initiation, or long-term bonds. Compatibility is more important than mate value and gender and any other individual difference for that matter. Compatibility
Yeah.
explains why some pairs of people are especially into each other, some pairs never get things off the ground, and some pairs never let the idea cross their minds. And I put a little note here saying, please ask him to unfold and explain this and talk about the studies that he did to make those points, because I agree with them all, but I just like it fleshed out a little bit for people listening.
Yeah, so I think the best way of thinking about compatibility, it gets back to some of those differences we were talking about earlier as people get
Yeah,
to know each other over time.
yeah,
So again, people as they gain familiarity with each other, have different experiences together, you get to situations where, okay, I'm gonna think this person's a 10, or this person seems like a 10 for me, even if they
right.
wouldn't be a 10 for other people. So relationships tend to do the best when essentially two people who think each other are tens find each other.
Yeah.
That's what we mean by compatibility. Now, the
Mm.
reason these relationships tend to do rather well is because, well, when people think that their partner is absolutely amazing, they
Yeah.
engage in all sorts of motivated reasoning kinds of biases that help to maintain the relationship, including things like they derogate alternative partners. So
Mm.
potential competitors who might come in get downgraded automatically in
Yeah.
the minds of the coupled people. So
Yeah.
that's one helpful thing that people do. The tricky thing is explaining exactly where compatibility comes from.
Mm,
Why do
mm,
I
mm.
think that you're a 10, whereas everybody else thinks you're a 6?
Yeah.
And what's so fascinating about this particular question is I think this is where many of the mysteries still remain
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem to have anything to do with stuff that you might say about your own personality or preferences or beliefs and things that the other person would say about their preferences and beliefs.
Yeah.
It's not about like a matching process.
Right.
It seems to be more of a building
Mm,
process,
mm, mm.
like finding something to connect over, having an enjoyable experience together, and then trying to repeat those enjoyable experiences over and over again.
Yeah.
And the couples that are successful at doing that end up being the ones that sort of build this suite of in jokes and stories and rituals
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that make them happy. And I think that's the best explanation we have for compatibility is that it's like this chaotic construction process that it's very hard to predict how it's going to
Mhm.
unfold.
Yeah, and I'd make 2 points that I think are covered in your book, if not as specifically as I'm going to say them, but that are there. Um, and I could turn to the passage if I want to take 10 minutes and look through my notes, but I'd rather just say it. One is that, of course, compatibility also sometimes applies to non-sexual, non-romantic relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
Your
Yeah.
best relationships are with life, or where you find that compatibility levels and another thing. And then the other thing is it's not to confuse with sameness, because one
Yeah.
of the reasons Jeannie and I are happy, very happy together as two old people, getting older together. And talk about leaning on someone's support. When you're having prostate MRIs and she's had a heart attack, all of which is true with Jeannie
Seriously.
and me, that other person sitting with you in the doctor's office is your lifeline to life. I mean, and you
Yeah.
trust them completely. So, good for all the young people dating and trying to get together. I'm looking at it from another side, and it's serious business now. Um,
Yeah.
but one thing I like in your book is that you don't confuse compatibility with sameness. And I'll give you an example from my own life. I never met an exam that I could pass or liked. I ran away from high school when I was 15. That was the end of my formal education. And I've read a lot and I'm pretty educated and I speak in universities and all that bullshit. But, um, and one of the reasons Jeannie and I are compatible is she's so good at things I'm not good at,
Hmm.
and I'm so good at things she's not good at. And we love that about
Yeah.
each other. And it isn't like, some mushy, she make, I mean, it's who does the taxes? Who does the financial planning? That's all Jeannie. Who does I went to
Yeah.
the bank the other day and tried to deposit a check, and the woman told me, well, you have to sign that. And I said, well, I never do this. Jeannie does. I wouldn't, so basically she sat down with my son Francis and went through all the papers and said, if I die of a heart attack next time I have one, instead of surviving, I'm showing you where everything is, because Frank
Yeah.
literally has no idea. On the other hand, I cook every day of the week. I do all the grocery shopping. I help with the child care. I'm a painter and a successful author. I get in here every morning and write. She has a very creative life in a different direction. She went to the School of Fashion Design in Boston and makes everything and has a big studio and beautiful things. But we are so different.
Yeah.
And our compatibility is the gratitude we have for each other to live. My life's huge because I live with a woman who could be running a corporation, and she's living with a guy who always has the next creative idea, and we love
Yeah.
each other for that.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that beautifully illustrates the way to think about similarities and differences. That
Yeah,
it isn't about counting up the similarities you have and the differences that you have and hoping that the similarities outweigh the differences.
right.
This is not how this works.
Yeah,
It is much more about are there similarities that you can lean into
yes,
that become a part of your meaningful daily experience
yeah,
together? And dissimilarities that either become this source of complementarity, like what you describe,
yeah,
or there are cases where people like genuinely disagree about some stuff. I mean,
sure.
believe it or not, there are couples that have different political orientations.
Yeah,
And how do they make it work? They don't really talk about that stuff.
sure.
And that works for them.
And that works for them. The other thing is
Yeah.
I just want to add about us, and that is where we are the same, is we have the same sense of humor. We
Yeah.
Our favorite movies are our favorite movies. We
Yeah.
like the same thing. We do a lot of art museums and art, and we know each other's thing on this. And she'll read a new biography of Vermeer, and she'll say, "You've got to read this." And when I read it, I'm not saying, "Oh, I'm just doing this for Jeannie." She knows exactly what will interest me. We listen to the Rest is History podcast with Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland, and we
Yeah.
both are totally into that, and so forth and so on. So where it's similar is a matter, of taste, whether it's food or how you do childcare or what you tell a kid when they ask you a question. That's where we're the same. But when it comes to the kind of materialistic career orientation, what are you good at? What are your interests in the way people measure each other often?
Yeah.
Income, whatever. That's where we're completely different. And you'd say, how did they ever get together?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I don't know if you saw the film Materialists, but Materialists last year kind of lampoons this
Yeah,
idea that you can draw up the perfect partner with these facts and figures and stats, whether it's
yeah,
height, whether it's income, whether it's, professional ambitions, etc. And kind of shows, at least my interpretation of the movie, this was not everybody's
yeah,
interpretation, but my interpretation of the movie was that it was showing that that approach is hollow. It
yeah,
feels like shopping. It feels like you're giving in to this market metaphor. And, you know, there are other ways. If we get out there and experience
yeah,
real people, preferably over time in small groups, that's my usual advice.
yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's so grueling of a market.
Let me get to a couple more things in your book, and then we'll have to do that because you probably have a life to live. But consider the possibility that we're still handcuffed by the market metaphor, even if by this point in the book, Yes, we have embraced the importance of compatibility over the idea that mating is all about winners and losers. Yes, we have recognized that strong relationships are characterized by communal bonds rather than gender differentiated exchange of goods and services. But all of the attempts to predict compatibility in this chapter required lining up the benefits and costs of dating this person versus that person as if desire lurks within a shopping list of attributes. Even if we acknowledge the enormous idiosyncrasy in who people consider to be, quote, a valuable, and quote, mate, the matching approaches continued to focus on the value that two people brought with them to the relationship. So I have not set that passage up, but I'm just going to ask you to explain what you're talking
Yeah.
about there, because it's an insight that it's a really brilliant thing you're saying, and I just want people to get into it.
Yeah. So we can embrace this idea that idiosyncrasy, that, compatibility is very important, right? Two people who think each other are tens need to find each other. But what makes two people tens for each other? It doesn't seem as though the answer can easily be found in the lists of attributes that people might self-report about themselves. We use some machine learning studies to try to get at this idea. We take all the attributes about you and all the attributes about these women you might be dating, and we crunch the numbers and we say who's going to be compatible with whom. And the machine
Yeah,
learning models say we can't do it,
yeah,
that
yeah,
we are unable to explain who fits well from
yeah.
all these collections of variables you would self-report about yourself.
Yeah, you
Uh,
talk about mate value and you say that
yeah,
it explains, and just to explain, mate value matters, but it matters most in the very specific context of where people are forming initial impressions. By the way, one of the very great strengths of your book is you talk about the massive differences, and you've been doing it in this podcast, of initial impression, what we
yeah,
think we're looking for, what we're actually looking for, and then weirdly, what you find and work with that can't be explained. So
yeah.
I love that. I mean, it's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. Like it's like these some people have surface level qualities that make them especially desirable.
Mm.
Some people are more physically attractive than other people. Some people are more confident, some people are more socially skilled.
Yeah.
This stuff matters, but it matters less
Yeah,
as people spend time together. It's like if you're spending your time dating, I'm now talking to the single people out there, the
right.
single frustrated people. If you're spending your time dating, swiping on apps, or if you're just going to bars and trying to like pick up strangers, you are playing in an unequal market. And
Mm.
many times that market penalizes you if you don't have those qualities. But the market is less punishing if groups are getting to know each other over time. I think about intramural sports teams. I think about improv classes or dance classes or cooking classes, things where the same people are going to be interacting over and over again.
Yeah,
If you're in those contexts, the people who have the super desirable qualities, they stop dominating the market so
yeah.
much and gives other people
A
a
chance,
chance to
yes.
get in there. This is why it's like if you're gonna use use the apps. But man, for most people, they're gonna have a better time supplementing it with other activities like that.
Yeah, and the whole small group idea again, where you have a
Yeah.
context. You
Yeah.
you you say regardless of your gender, dating troubles are normal, but if you are a man, dating troubles plus internet misogyny, plus the Evo script, which I'm going to ask you to explain, means that you might view your dating troubles as women's fault because you are part of an underclass of men, in which case there probably isn't anything you can do about it except rage against feminists. Dot, dot, dot. But today, I also view evolutionary psychology as reckless. It is reckless because we know that evolutionary frames feed into lay people's tendencies to rely on two particularly pernicious modes of thought, essentialism and determinism. And then you go on and you say trad wives and men's rights. Advocates take evolutionary finding to mean that we can cure our social ills by returning to the way things were done in the past, to a time when spheres of men and women were well defined and separate. And of course, you and I have talked about the fact that often these are false ideas because they don't really want to go back to the hunter-gatherer past in the
Right.
Kalahari, where men and
Right.
women were really equal. But just unpack what I've been reading there a little bit. These terms, evolutionary psychology is reckless. Talk about that. And then the Evo script,
Yeah.
just talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is why I suddenly realized, like, oh, wait a minute, I think I need to write a book
Yeah,
because, I mean, I've been having a good time publishing research and engaging in academic debate on these topics. I like
yeah,
doing that. But I realized that a lot of the evolutionary psychology classics had really escaped the ivory tower in the last 10 years and really got spun out of control in some
yeah,
of these darker corners of the internet. And I'm talking about manosphere, sort of incel ideologies. Some people may have heard of the red pill, or
yeah, the whole bit.
even worse, the black pill. But these ideas are very tied up in what I call the Evo script, which are these, I think, accepted as common sense ideas about how human mating works. But it's like the importance of mate value, the pervasiveness of gender differences, and then something else we haven't talked about so much today, which is this distinction between people who are good for a quickie and people who are good for marriage, okay? And that these are like
Yeah.
two different kinds of
Well, and
people.
you also write in those sections, because I enjoyed that part of your book very much, how sometimes people go in with the idea that, this is a quickie or marriage, but actually very quickly they conform to the genuinely evolutionary type where they're actually looking for companionship, whatever they call it, and one thing morphs into the other.
Yeah. Yeah, right. It can be very, very unpredictable. And if you ask people, if you ask people as relationships are getting off the ground, like before anything sexual has happened,
Mhm.
and you pull them aside and you say, like, hey, is this relationship short term or long term? Or don't
Yeah,
you know? Everybody's like, I don't know. I don't know where this is going.
yeah,
So that's the thing. It's all very unpredictable and lots of unknowns early on. So I wanted to write the book because it had occurred to me that a lot of these tenets of evolutionary psychology that I call the Evo script, our research had been really deconstructing these ideas for a
yeah,
long time,
yeah.
and like the men online didn't seem to know. And
Yeah, and you
and
write, you say odds are that a young man who feels aggrieved about sex and romance implicitly has a mating market model of sex and relationships initiation in mind. And then you say he might believe that men and women have very different goals and preferences in the dating arena, acknowledging that women are indeed wary of casual sex, especially with strange men they do not know. Advise him not to be one of those strange men. Beyond that, few differences remain. Men and women want partners who are smart, funny, attentive, supportive, and make them feel special. Men and women both enjoy sex and will be happiest in relationships that are communal and bonded. And then you say, most important of all, men and women do not experience perpetual relational conflict because of their differing evolved needs and preferences, but rather have a whole host of mental biases that help them see the best in each other. Talk about those mental biases for a minute, because I found that so interesting.
Yeah, so one of those is this derogation of alternatives idea that, that when alternative partners come knocking, people who are in close relationships, especially if those relationships are committed and happy, they
Yeah,
tend to see those alternative partners as being particularly undesirable. But that's
yeah,
not the only way that people do this. They also tend to be pretty good at defending their relationships mentally against other kinds of threats too. So
yeah,
let's say I were to come in and I were to point out something about your relationship that like seems like a red flag to me,
yeah,
seems
yeah,
like a warning sign.
yeah,
What you're gonna do, I mean, you might smile politely or
yeah.
agree and nod, whatever, but what you're
If
really
it was
thinking,
you personally, I would take it very seriously and say,
yeah.
fuck me, he knows what he's talking about.
I would
He's
never
got the
do
science to back up why I'm an
I would
asshole.
never I would never do it
I know
because
you would.
what you're gonna do is you're gonna be like, yeah, but he doesn't get it because actually that's a very endearing thing that my wife does. And in fact, you know what? If I were in another relationship, pretty much everybody is like this anyway.
Sure.
But the things that are true of my partner that are good are unique.
Yes.
So I call this idea strengths unique, weaknesses common, right? So if the
Yeah.
strengths of my partner are really specific to my partner and the weaknesses are shared by everybody, well, why would you ever let this person go? And again, like I don't, some people you can frame this stuff as stupid human tricks if you want. I think
Yeah.
it's beautiful because we would never maintain our close relationships if we didn't do stuff like this.
You say there are two important implications here, and I'm pulling this out of context. First, men and women think that they want different things in a partner, and when browsing photos online, their behavior shows modest gender differences. But when they meet face to face, these gender differences evaporate. So it's a theme that runs all the way through your book. and is kind of the illusion of how we think things are and then how they really are. Even if illusory gender differences pervade the domains of earning potential and attractiveness preferences, one meaningful gendered preference would remain intact. The timeless adage that she wants an older man and he wants a younger woman. Most men and women articulate this preference in marriage pairings tend to reflect it. And then you talk about sex and desire. Women tend to be more generous lovers on average, a difference that contributes to the infamous, quote, orgasm gap, such that men are more likely than women to have an orgasm in a heterosexual encounter. Bisexual women appear to be well aware of this trend, and hence they tend to prefer women for casual sex. So you get into sex, and we've spent most of our time on other subjects here, but I don't want to pass through it because I want people to understand the scope of this book.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
basically everything is in this book. So anything
I
you can
really
think of.
tried to cover as much as I realistically
Yeah.
could.
And I liked all your stuff about sex, but just go there for a minute because,
Yeah.
again, you myth bust. You say, oh, men are very different than women sexually and so forth. Well, not so fast because they really aren't.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, I am sure that I saw the film Annie Hall
Yes.
before I was in a sexual relationship. I'm
Yeah.
quite confident that that's true. And so, in watching that movie, you would think, boy, this looks tough because what
Yeah.
I see in this movie is that here are these men and women in relationships, okay?
Yeah.
They are in committed relationships, and the
Yeah.
man is always asking for sex in that
Yeah.
movie, and the woman is always resisting. It's like if you count up the occasions in that movie, it's
Yeah.
like 80% of the time it's the guy.
Yeah.
Okay, that isn't what real couples look like. Okay,
No.
real couples, it's like 55-45
Yeah.
on the men's side, but it's not nearly that big a difference. So I
Yeah.
just think it's just like we overblow these things. We have a miscalibrated idea
Yeah.
about how big these differences are. So even the ones that are there, like ongoing sexual desire, it's not nearly that stark.
No. And one of the advantages of a longer term relationship where really Jeannie is my best friend and support and all the things we've been talking about, having fought through all the deficiencies that I had and had to relearn basically what a human male is supposed to be like, not through browbeating, by the way, but by, just what
Yeah,
works.
yeah,
Um, and that is sexuality. You read a lot of this stuff, whether it's the Daily Mail or the New York Times, they're always a repeated feature is sort of interpreting sexuality and how blah, 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 blah. And in my head, I'm just saying, well, just talk about it. Like, what do
yeah,
you mean? When do you want sex? It's like, why do people treat this discussion in relationships as if, you don't talk about lunch this way. You don't talk about breakfast this way.
right.
You don't talk about childcare this way. Why is this
Yeah,
a subject where you have to intuitively feel?
yeah,
And again, in my experience, it hasn't actually been that way. That's more the Annie Hall thing. How do you approach?
yeah,
In real life, people actually talk about their level of desire and how they feel. And you bring up the
yeah,
thing of, the old chestnut about, oh, well, she has a headache. I have a headache. I have to.
yeah,
And
right.
that's not really the way it is.
Yeah,
But I don't also feel that talking about sex and, hey, it's time now. It's been a couple of, let's, that's not off the table. And
yeah.
I don't think you have to be married 56 years to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with any kind of vulnerable thing in a relationship,
Yeah.
look, people get nervous about being hurt, and there's a million ways that relationship partners can hurt each other. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the risk. You need to take this risk to get the benefits. I mean, this is another like basic adage of close relationships research. Um, but the risks are there, and part of the risks are about being vulnerable about like, your desire to have sex with somebody, to be intimate with somebody else, your desire to have them support you in ways that they're not currently doing, your desire to have them be happy for you when you achieve something, rather than, maybe jealous, which is
Yeah.
certainly there are many possible reactions that aren't what we're looking for.
Mm.
Um, the you know with all of the one easy trick to fix things. I mean, it really there the best way we have is to be able to talk about these things
Yeah,
openly.
exactly.
and,
And that's
and
again where gender
yeah,
roles are so awful because the guy has to be this guy, and I can't talk
yeah,
about the fact that I have this need or, ask her a question because isn't, women talk that men don't talk. But of course, this is such bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
I
with
mean, this
sex
is
in
your best friend. This is
yeah.
the person you count on. What do you mean you
Yeah.
can't talk to them about this?
Yeah, I think with sex in particular, the trickiness comes with the fact that mystery
Yeah,
is sexy.
yeah,
And how do we do mystery while also like clearly communicating our preferences and our desires at the same
sure.
time? And I agree that's tricky, but these things are not impossible. And sometimes the
Yeah,
mystery is coming from like, the experiences that I like, I'm my own person. I go off and I have my own experiences. And
sure.
sometimes just the simple fact that I'm growing and expanding that's something that I can bring back, like something new to discover about somebody
Yeah,
else. Like
yeah,
mystery is often about discovering things about the other person, what they think, what they feel that you don't know. And
yeah,
so thinking about it that way instead of like, well, like if we arrange sex and it's going to all feel very rote and very unsexy, like there are ways of blending these two things.
yeah. And one of them is just learning as the years go by in a longer relationship what the other person really enjoys or doesn't. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're younger, you sort of talk about things. It's the same kind of thing of, you've eaten a restaurant, great, that was a great meal, and the other person's feeling it wasn't, but
Yeah.
she or he doesn't say so because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But as a few
Yeah.
years later, you're only going to restaurants that you like
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
really know now
Yeah. Yeah.
how they
Exactly.
react. So,
Yeah.
it's kind of a difference. One thing you get into, and we won't go too deep a dive, but you say you can tell that human close relationships, I love this point, are important by focusing on what happens when they end, dot, dot,
Yeah.
dot. The distress of a broken bond is baked deep into our biology too. During a breakup, stress hormones are sky high. It's impossible to sleep or concentrate. So you sort of have a backhanded compliment to love by talking about what
Yeah.
happened
Right.
at a breakup. It's like, no, no, this really is the end of the world. It's a big deal. Just go there a little bit.
Yeah, so it's true when the reason we think about breakups as being a double whammy of stress is because, well, you've had this painful, difficult thing happen to you,
Yeah,
and the person you would usually go to when a painful, difficult thing happens to you is also gone.
yeah,
So it's like bad thing and loss of support to deal with bad thing.
yeah,
So this is why the body often reacts like something is very wrong. You engage that fight or flight system. There's nothing actually to fight or run from, and
right,
so
right.
your body essentially gets hyperactivated
Yeah,
in this way, and this is can really do some stress related
sure,
damage to people.
sure.
Getting over a breakup, it always takes time.
Yeah,
It's facilitated by things like having an alternative support system available. This is actually why women tend to manage breakups a little bit better than men because they're more likely to still have a support system
yeah,
around. Um, and things like forming a coherent narrative or story about what happened. I mean, we
yeah,
are creatures that reason through things. We need meaning. We need coherence. Um, and sometimes that's why we need to tell and retell the
yeah,
story of the breakup, 100 times to various people, is because we're trying to craft a narrative about what
yeah. I mean,
happened.
it's free therapy.
Yeah, right, right. And so we need to be thankful for our friends when they are
Sure.
there for us when going through a breakup. And if you are that friend, remember it's really hard and to the extent you can be there for your friend, it's a really good idea.
Hold your book up and read the title and subtitle. I just want to keep promoting it. Tell people that it's
You
going to be
bet.
our it's going to
Here
be
we
our
go.
offer in June, I believe, for
Bonded by Evolution, the new science of love and connection. That's me, Paul Eastwick, and yeah, hopefully the book club recommendation for June.
Yeah, so I have a favor to ask you, and then I have one more little question to go into. The favor is when I sign off here, would you please stay on the line, as it were, and talk to my producer, Ernie Gregg, because
Yeah,
he'll
it's great.
ask you a couple questions about how we best tie into what you're doing and promote you best.
Sounds
And then
great.
the second thing is he will ask you if you have any suggestions for guests we should be talking to. Some of our
Okay.
best guests have come from other guests, people we
Okay.
wouldn't have thought of. And it could be someone you work with, it could be another person, it could be an author, or somebody who's just, you think we should talk to them.
Okay.
But
Very
I have a
good.
last question, and that is just your prediction. I was noticing today Christine Emba, who writes for the Washington Post, or
Yeah.
maybe this was in the Time, has an article out that says, um, what does she say here? She begins saying, at least incels cared about getting with the opposite sex. The mostly male, mostly heterosexual look smackers, and I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
Those who have come to dominate social media with their, and another word I don't know, brain rotted, all in one word,
Yeah.
vernacular and impenetrability, blah blah blah. And she talks about the red pill and the manosphere and things you deal with. And I don't want to get into Christine's article. But what I do want to get into is your own two things. I want to say your own predictions, like nobody's having babies. Of course, people are still having babies, but
Yeah.
the
Right.
Earth.
Yeah.
Elon Musk wants us all to populate Mars because we're not apparently doing the job on Earth.
Seriously.
Whatever. So there's a real thing, and we've interviewed a whole number of people who are pronatalists, from all over the map, uh, Roman Catholic,
Yeah.
and all the rest. So there's that. So what is your take? Okay, you work with a self-selected college audience.
Yeah.
College audiences aren't everybody. They're not working class Americans who tend not to get married these days, if you look at the numbers. Um, but you're studying all this. What's your prediction? Where are we going to go when it comes to marriage, having children, bonded relationships, the power of sort of the incels, the manosphere, all
Yep.
these currents? And you look at it, what would you change about how people are looking at things? Well, that's sort of your book, but what do you think is going to happen to us?
It's so interesting because there are a number of simultaneous threads here, kind of pushing in the same direction,
Yeah,
and some of these threads I would even applaud.
yeah,
And those threads are there is less stigma about folks who want to be single. I don't want
yeah,
to stop that. That's
yeah,
great. I think that's fantastic.
yeah,
We also see today that people are, I guess the sort of relationship recession, sex recession. I think it's better characterized as a delay.
yeah,
Okay. And I don't know if that's unhealthy for people. It's going to have birth rate consequences, but I don't know if it's psychologically unhealthy
yeah,
for people to delay things. There was an
sure.
article the other day, I think this was in the New York Times, about how the dropping birth rates are happening among the groups that we wanted the birth rates to go down, like teen moms. Those those are the folks who are having less kids. That was
Yeah,
what we said
it was
20
in
years
the
ago.
Times. Yeah, I read
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Please have fewer kids. They did. Great. We win. Awesome. But if the trends are people are at home, they are on their phones, they aren't going out and meeting people, they are creating a culture around like relationships are cringe, that makes me nervous. I think there was an article in the New Yorker about this, about what's going
yeah,
on in Korea and South Korea.
which I
That
read too. Yeah.
that is maybe what's happening there.
Hmm.
Also, like prejudice against children.
Hmm.
This is oh, hit the brakes. These are the trends that make me nervous.
Yeah,
And the hard thing is separating these things. Like we don't know how much the rise in singles is less stigma versus like relationships are cringe.
sure.
I think it's more the loss of stigma, but I am here to fight relationships are cringe all day, every day.
Yeah, yeah.
Relationships are not cringe. They're very important.
Yeah, and I have a sort of a take on it from my perspective at 73 and with kids and grandkids, and that is that some of my impassioned defense of relationships, including spilling my guts in a book called The Gospel of Zip about
Yeah.
my own deficiencies and why I went to therapy and how I changed and what I became instead of what I was, is not to vindicate being married with children, but because I genuinely feel sorry for the people who have such a misunderstanding of what a relationship is that they've bailed. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about the people who informed and choose to be single or not to have
Yeah.
a child,
Yeah.
not the people you support, but the people who have given up for the wrong reasons, in the sense
Yeah.
that it's like, I look back on my life and my relationship with Jeannie. I'm glad we didn't give up.
Yeah.
I'm glad we persisted because these are the best days of my life. I
Yeah.
literally wouldn't trade one man, and that includes knowing I'm getting closer to death.
Yeah.
Jeannie and I are very happy together, even if this is our last day on earth. And we got there because in the end, we came to the same realizations that you've written a whole book about,
Yeah.
which I said at the
Yeah.
beginning happens to mirror everything I've learned is true, is what you found through research that
That's
I
great.
stumbled into blindly. I really feel sorry for people who are staring at their phone, walking by me at as a certain age, male or female, when I say, "Hey, how are you?" and I mean it, and if they'd stop and talk
Yeah.
and make eye contact, I'd invite them in for a cup of coffee. I'm the
Yeah.
kind of person they'd actually want to know.
Yeah.
And I have a
Yeah.
nice dog they would enjoy playing with. And it's a human relationship. And I would introduce them to someone who could help them if they're looking for a job or whatever. I'm part of a very vibrant old human community, not huge, but we got our
Yeah.
little group here. And I feel so sorry for younger people who aren't, who, who just seem so within
Yeah.
and and are so different than say the older women at Market Basket where I go shopping that at the checkout counter, and I know all of their stories because we always stop
Yeah.
and talk because I take extra time. That's a community. That's a little
Yeah.
community. It isn't just, but I don't see a lot of younger people having relationships like that. And then when you extrapolate the implication into the romantic connection,
Yeah.
how would this person ever be a mother or a father or make that connection? I really feel sad
Yeah.
because it's like meeting someone that's colorblind in an art museum. And
Yeah.
okay, the black and white's interesting,
Yeah.
but
I think it, yeah. We spend a lot of time lamenting the phones, and I think what you're hitting on there is the real reason to lament the phones, because the phones can help bridge distance too. I
sure,
mean,
of
I'm helps
course,
me stay connected to like my high school
it
buddies
helps me
who
find
all,
shit.
yeah. But the phones have a funny way of feeling like social connection, feeling like you're participating in the world when you're
Mhm.
actually not, and it keeps us all inside. We all go out less than we
Yeah,
used to, and of all ages, and that bums me out.
yeah, and I'm sure you feel the same sadness because you get pleasure from your relationship
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
from
Yeah,
connectedness.
exactly. And seeing people. I mean, I mean, I just got back from a conference. Thousands of people, everybody's interacting. I mean, again,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, how old fashioned is this? How quaint. Oh, wow. This feels like a genuine human connection.
Well, and half the stories in your book, like you begin with the conversation with that young woman who says, I
Yeah.
have to settle, who do I have to settle? I mean, you're not going to do this on the phone with strangers.
Right.
This is in a classroom environment,
Right.
and this is why a lot of very knowledgeable people who aren't even religious lament people not going to church. It isn't that
Yeah.
they want everybody to be religious, but it's like one more thing you don't do.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly right. Anything that rebuilds community, I want to see efforts in this direction. We need more of this.
Me too. And by the way, your book, one more time, hold it up.
Here it is.
Yeah, this book is about rebuilding community.
Yeah.
Bonded by Evolution, The New Science of Love and Connection by Paul Eastwick. It's a brilliant book. It's beautifully researched. It's so well written, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. Read it at a sitting, made all my notes, and have really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Frank.
It was terrific. And please stay and talk to Ernie for 2 minutes about, or three or five or whatever, um, about that. And by the way, one thing about Ernie, who's also my best friend, showing that compatibility works in various, Ernie's gay. He's married to a man. He and I are like on paper, it would look like, how are these guys working together? But this bonded relationship, again, like with Jeannie, Ernie does what I don't do. I'm doing what he's able to then use. And it's another one of these things where counterintuitively, it works wonderfully, precisely
Yeah.
because, the relationship is so important to each of us.
Yeah. 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 No, that's a beautiful example. My relationship with my podcast co-host is sort of similar.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and this is the stuff of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I have good news, I don't just tell Jeannie, I call Ernie.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
having a
There you
bad
go.
day, he tells me. I
There you
mean,
go.
but doesn't that seem like duh? Well, of course, these are your friends and people you're working
Yeah.
with. Well, not so fast. There's a lot of people
Yeah.
who don't have that privilege.
Yeah. I think people have forgotten some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, anyway, great. Nice talking
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
love it.